Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I tend to know a little bit about computers every once in a while, whenever it's convenient. Again, my name's Tom Stallings. A lot of people call me the solutions architect. It's an inside joke with the Essentials. But a little bit about me. Um, there we go. Let's skip the next slide here. Okay. So I've been doing animated lighting for about 4 years. I've also been doing switching and routing for 15 years professionally. Um, I have all kinds of certifications, CCNA, MCSE. I got my master's in IT. So I've really been doing a lot with the networking field, server field, you name it field. I kind of do a bunch of everything. I actually own and operate 3 companies, 2 of which are IT. Um, One of the things that I always like to talk about is show networking. I'm going to go ahead and warn you now. I tend to get technical quick, so I'm trying to keep it as simple as I can. But sometimes I do dive into a deep end and start getting technical and diving through a few things. So I apologize for that. The other thing is I like this to be as interactive as possible. So if you have a question, just put it in chat, and we'll save that for the end as best we can. And I also will show a couple extra things that you can do to make your network a little bit better, and also show you some things that not a lot of people think about that will work. But although in the professional IT world, it's a big no-no. So we'll get into that later. So topics that we'll cover, what's a show network? What's the basics of a network? Can you operate 2 networks from 1 network? Some network examples, trick of the trade. And then we'll talk a lot about layer 1, 2, and 3. Layer 1 is physical, layer 2 is basically the switch level, and then layer 3 is the routing level. I won't get into the different ones, that actually there's 7, but it is not chocolate cake or vanilla cake or anything like that. It's just how a packet is formed and how it sends from point A to point B. So just talking about that, it gets very complex on how communication actually happens between your show and your devices, or just normal devices at home. So we're supposed to put in one interesting thing that we like about ourselves, by the way. And when I'm not doing work or working on my show, I do love to go fish. So definitely something I love to do here in Florida. All right. So what is a network? A network, in its simplicity, is basically 2 or more devices that connect to shared data. That could be your laptop and your cell phone. That could be your laptop and your printer, your computer and your printer, your Pi and your Falcon. Is basically making up your network. And it's basically what you call a broadcast domain. So anything inside your home network is a broadcast domain. So everything you can communicate together, everybody can see each other, and you're able to broadcast to all the devices. So when you break down a network, it's really simple, right? What do you have? You have a router, which is what we call layer 3, and this is what does your routing from the inside to the outside network, and basically can tell you where other devices go inside your network. So if you look at this diagram here, you see right here beside the ISP is your router. Because IP addresses across the world, there's only but so many IP addresses that you're allowed to use from a public standpoint. So your ISP will give you, most ISPs will give you 1 public IP that goes into your router, and then inside your network, it's a private IP to keep everything separate. And one of the main things that a router would do inside of your network is basically DNS resolution. So when you go to google.com, if you didn't know, that is actually an IP address. So if you were to go here, can y'all see my command line? Okay. So if you were to go here and ping google.com, you can see here that it's actually just an IP address. Now they have many IP addresses. This is just the one we saw. We're not going to get into how that works. So as you can see, a router is very important because when you go to type in google.com, which is a simple name, it's actually, resolving to an IP address that then you can actually get to the IP address instead of that. So can you imagine if you had to go to amazon.com or Google or all the product pages, you had to know each one of these numbers. And I mean, it could be, really anything. You'd have to memorize all these numbers. It'd be a big nightmare. So when you look at how simple or how cheap, this Linksys router that you see right here, it's pretty amazing at what they can do. One of the other things that that's a hot topic for shows is definitely the Wi-Fi. So most routers you get from your ISPs come with the Wi-Fi built in. And not only are they doing your routing between the inside of your network and the outside of the network, they're also doing your Wi-Fi. I, however, would recommend, not saying you have to, that you try to get a separate Wi-Fi device and cut off your Wi-Fi on your router. It's just more overhead for it. They're $50 routers. They really have no business doing the Wi-Fi, and just let them do the routing. Again, that's my opinion. You can take it or leave it. But most of the time your Wi-Fi through your ISP Wi-Fi is definitely not the strongest because it's made by the cheapest parts. Plus, it's got more CPU usage and all that kind of stuff. So the other thing that you may see is some routers even have a cable modem, or what the ISP will call a Demarc location. That's basically where they plug into you, and lo and behold, they're one in 1,000 task device can be your cable modem. Most of the time they're separate. And then usually within your network, you're going to have a switch right below your router. Some people have lots of switches, and those operate on layer 2. Now, layer 2, from a high level, is basically MAC addresses. So it doesn't really care what your IP address per se. It actually goes off a MAC address. So a switch will learn what's called a MAC address table, and it knows that MAC address is here, and then it uploads it and all that kind of stuff. I won't get into how that works, but Ethernet switches are typically layer 2. They do have layer 3 switches, which can do routing. But that's another class. So let's talk about a switch for a second. For some reason, my thing is not switching here. Here we go. So what does a switch do? Well, it connects multiple wired devices together. Simple, right? Most switches nowadays have the ability to actually power your devices. If you got a lot of IP cameras at your house, a bunch of Wi-Fi devices, IoT devices, all of that can actually be powered by your switch. If I were to make a recommendation, if you can make the extra money, go ahead and get the switch that not only is gigabits. I don't even think you can buy 100 megabit switches anymore unless you find them in a yard sale. Definitely make sure you get gigabit. And I would also make sure that you get PoE. You never know when you need it. You never know when Dan Culp or David Pitch from Falcon or somebody new comes to the market, and next thing you know, we got a controller powered via PoE. That may already exist. It could have came out yesterday. I don't know, but it's just one of those things that with the way the market's going, you definitely want PoE. And as I was saying in the previous slide, data is sent to the port, only to the port that it needs to send to via MAC address. This is important later when I talk about MAC address. Your next device is the one I was telling you is kind of the all-in-one. It's your router, right? You see this big demon-looking one that's right here. You know, it's got all these antennas and, you know, supposed to be bad to the bone and call it the stealth and whatever you want to call it. I think this particular one's an ASUS, but what is it that it actually does? So, like I said, it connects multiple networks together, multiple broadcast domains together. So outside, inside, or basically inside to inside. It is the real brain of your home network. So in order for anybody to get internet or to communicate across or to receive an IP address, your router is the way to go. The routers can range from anywhere from $40 all the way up to, if you get commercially, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 routers. I've actually built a router in a data center that was $500,000. So they can get very big, and it was actually half a rack, but they can get very big very quick. What do you need for your house? I'm not here to recommend anything. Most of you get them from your ISPs. That's perfectly fine. I, however, recommend that you do try to get your own, because number one, you're paying that monthly fee. And number two, if something goes wrong, then, you know, you're the one that's replacing. You're not waiting 3 or 4 or 5 days for your ISP to show up. The caveat to that is a lot of times the ISP won't troubleshoot your network because you're on a different router. Oh, you know, blah, blah, blah. So really up to you, but so some people say, well, you can only have one in a network. Well, that's true. You only want one in a network. But there is a scenario that you can do where you put a router behind a router and you're doing a network no-no called double natting. I won't get into what and how that is. But you can run a show network off of your main router, and basically we'll get into the IP addresses. So like if your main router is 192.168.0 dot, and your show network is 192.168.1 dot, then the WAN port would be getting an IP from your home, and then that one would be getting an IP from, and then that one gives out the show side so that your show network can actually reach the internet. There's other ways to do this, but this is typically the most popular as far as hooking in a router behind a router. Your router also does DHCP. So this is one of the most important things. You basically call it plug and play. You get your router, you plug in a device, it gets the IP, you're ready to go. Nothing you have to do. So it's probably one of the most important key pieces of your home network as far as routing. All right, Wi-Fi access points. So there's a couple classes on this in this VCS, so I'm not going to get into too much as far as this, but this basically converts your hardwire into wireless so that you can walk around your house. How does it relate to our show? Well, you got Pixie Sticks. You also got that you're out at your show at 8 o'clock at night talking to people, and you're on your phone. You want to switch a song, pull up your phone, you're right there, boom, switch the song. The speed at what you connect to seems to be a hot topic. So it really depends on two factors. Number one, the gear that you have, and number two, your actual gear that you have as far as your client. So in other words, your computer, your phone, or something like that. Most Wi-Fi access points can put out more power than most devices pushing back. So this is why sometimes you may be out in your yard, you're getting 3 bars, but you're not really communicating back because your phone antenna is kind of built into your phone. You don't see it, yada, yada, yada. Or you got this nice glittery, razzmatazz phone case on it that's actually hindering your Wi-Fi ability on your phone. And that's why sometimes people are outside, well, I got 3 bars, but usually that means your device is not able to communicate to the AP. You're able to see the AP, but the AP can't see you. So when you're troubleshooting Wi-Fi, even though you may see you have more bars or this or that, you really have to look at it from both sides. And most of the times you can get into the APs and actually see that the AP is seeing you at a horrible signal, but yet you're seeing the AP at a better signal. So that's more of the advanced stuff. We won't get into that. There's also many different versions of Wi-Fi access points. I highly will recommend Ubiquiti Unify system. What's great about these, they're very popular. They're very widely supported, and they're very simple to set up. Yes, you have to have a controller, but they have two versions. You have a software controller, which is free, but they also have a what's called a hardware controller. That's I don't know. I remember last time I checked it was $99. Unify has a whole line that you can basically do your complete network. Routing, switching, Wi-Fi. They now do access doors, your security. They have cameras. They do point-to-points if you're shooting 700 feet to try to get some connection some far away. They do it all. So I really recommend looking into Unify for your home. It's probably the cheapest, high-grade, consumer-rated stuff that you can get. And there's so many people that can help you with this type of stuff as far as Ubiquiti. There's other brands out there. There's Google Wi-Fi, stuff like, or the Mesh, Google Mesh and stuff like that. But I really like Ubiquiti, and I use it even at some of my clients for businesses too. The other thing that Ubiquiti does as well is their access points are only layer 2. They don't do routing. So that's very important. All it does is Wi-Fi. It gives you Wi-Fi, provides it, sends the data, that's it. So your Wi-Fi from a performance standby is much higher through Ubiquiti access point than it would be your home router, because it's not worried about all the other stuff that it has to do. So the other part of your network that most people don't think of is, and it's usually built in, is your cable modem or your Demarc. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but if you look on your house, usually it's right outside. This is where the fiber comes up. This is where the coax comes in. Some routers have it built in. That's why you got, with like a Verizon or a Fios or a Frontier, the cable comes right into the back of the modem. And this is basically a Demarc is where people or where your ISP ends, and they'll say, basically from there down is your responsibility, depending on who the ISP is. So let's get into a little bit of cabling. So this is the layer 1, or the physical side of things. What it pertains, there's so many different types of cable, but pertaining to our hobby, it really comes down to twisted pair, right? So there is different versions, and I'll explain a little bit to each one, just at a high level of which one and which one most people use. Obviously, most people use unshielded or UTP cable, but there's also different versions. There's Cat 5e, there's Cat 6, Cat 7, Cat 6a. There's more cats coming out. We're going to have enough cats to run a zoo here soon. So it's amazing the technology that's coming out. What does it actually mean? So if you were to slice open a cable, and I should have put a picture up there. Maybe I'll put it up later. Each pair is twisted to be able to communicate at a different frequency. So if you ever actually looked at it and studied it, you'll notice that some are not twisted as much, some are twisted tighter, and that's just a way to make the best throughput. Cat 6 cable is twisted tighter than Cat 5e. Cat 7 is a little bit tighter and shorter. What does that mean in this hobby? Nothing. Cat 5e is just as good as Cat 7 because most controllers are all 100 meg ports anyway. Should you buy Cat 7? Well, if you want to spend the extra money, sure. Should you buy Cat 6 or Cat 6A? Sure. If you got the money and want to spend a little bit extra for future ability, that's fine. Running it in your yard just to a controller, Cat 5e is just as good and cheaper. And I personally buy the unshielded cable because if it gets broke or a squirrel eats it or a rabbit, you throw it right away and it's done. Sorry. Shielded has a sheathing that goes around it that helps protect it from EMI or electrical magnetic interference. Not really used in this hobby. Sometimes people use it when they're running it in walls and stuff like that so that electrical fields can't interfere with it. Plenum horizon cable, same thing. This is the stuff that goes up. It's fire resistant. Has to resist fire for so many seconds to pass. It's more of your commercial grade. And then there is direct barrel UV resistant cable that you can run outside so it doesn't. If you ever ran unshielded outside, especially in Florida, after a season, a blue cable is now almost white. Stuff starts getting brittle, stuff like that. So the direct barrel and UV resistant cable is very good for places like Florida or Arizona or Texas or even up north. CCA, copper, platinum, and aluminum. So this is basically a cable that is made out of aluminum and dipped in copper. It is the cheapest cable on the market. You're going to think, oh my gosh, I found a deal. But if you find CCA, do not buy it. The reason is that CCA cable breaks very, very easy. So after so much time, you're going to sit there, and if you twist it too much or make it turn too fast or somebody steps on it, you break one pair of your Ethernet cable, and next thing you know, you're troubleshooting, trying to figure out where it's at. You have to hook up Ethernet testers, yada, yada, yada. So just try to stay away from CCA. What could you use CCA for? If you're making a permanent run from your attic out to your doorbell to run your doorbell, if it never moves again after you hook it up, that's probably perfectly fine. As a matter of fact, a lot of people use the CCA stuff for things like that. How about fiber optics? Can you use fiber optics? Yeah, you could. But why would you? Well, fiber is getting cheaper. I actually run fiber between my outside building and my house. And the other reason that a lot of people don't realize is, especially between houses, is grounding. Your Cat 5 cable is conductive. So if it ever gets struck by lightning or gets a lightning bolt near it, it's going to go up both sides of the port. Or if you got a grounding difference between your ground, it's going to go up and fry both ports on both sides or one port on one side. So a lot of people run fiber for that type of thing so that you're basically making an electrical separation between outside and inside. Do you have to do it in this hobby? Absolutely not. Can you? Sure. More popular thing to see that on is basically interconnecting router to switch or a switch to switch. So I don't recommend fiber, but I know a lot of people ask about it. All right. So what is an IP address? Well, an IP address is basically, and this is where I'm going to start to hopefully not dive too deep into it, is basically a tattoo on your computer, right? Each network will give yourself an IP address if you're doing DHCP, or you statically assign it. There is many classes to each IP address. There's class A, B, C, D, and E. Class A, you may have seen with, let's see. I've lost my notes here. Something popped up here. Anyway. Class A, you may have seen of like 10.1.0.1. Class B, you may have seen is 172.16.1.1. And then Class C is the most common, which is 192.168.1.1. 0.1 or 1.1 or 2.1, depending on your ISP, depending on how you want to do it at home. The rabbit hole of IP addresses is what's called subnetting. So if you look where it says default subnet mask, depending on whether it's a Class C, Class B, or Class A, which you can actually split that further. And then you can split that further called supernetting, but I'm not going to get into that. So a lot of people ask me, well, can I have a 10 dot address and still run it as a Class C, which is basically 255, 255, 255.0? The answer is yes. A lot of people are so used to that 192.168.1.1 IP address that they want to go to 10 dot addressing or 172 addressing, so that you just are different and stuff like that. So yes, you can absolutely, mix and match them. I won't get into how to do it or what it means or anything like that, because that's just too advanced. If you want to know that stuff or want to figure out some things, you can contact me on Facebook. So the important thing is just know your IP address scheme. Just know that there's different classes and subnets. So subnet mask is actually important. So let's talk about static versus dynamic. Okay. Static IP addresses. Come on. There we go. Static IP addresses is where you physically set your controller to be on a static IP, or you physically set your laptop to be on a static IP so it never changes. DHCP, which is dynamic, which basically means your router hands you an IP address, goes off of a certain range. Depending on your scope, it could be 5 through 100, could be 5 through 253, 254. It just depends on how you have it set up. And those are just automatic. The other thing is, well, how do I get my computer to get the same IP address over and over and over again? Well, the answer is you can do a DHCP reservation, which is basically where you take the MAC address and tell your router this MAC address, whenever it gets on my network, gets this IP. And it reserves this IP address for just that computer or that phone or whatever. So that's one way of assigning a static IP. The other thing is actually physically statically assigning it. Just make sure that when you statically assign an IP address, that doesn't mean reservation, that you're outside of the scope. So on your home network or your show network, whatever you want to do it, I always leave 2 through 50 for static IPs as far as any of my computer stuff. And then anything above 180 to 253 or 254, I'm sorry, is my show side, but that's a different story. We'll get into that soon. So just make sure you know that you're outside of that range so that something doesn't get the IP address. And then next thing you know, you got a DHCP conflict where you're both trying to be on the same IP or both devices. I've went into $1 million businesses and their network's completely down, and somebody assigned 2 static IPs and some other stuff too. But it's just amazing how simple an IP address can take things down and really make things not go good because they statically assigned a server to the same thing as the other server. Well, what does all this have to do with my show? So your show is, what you work on all year long. Why is this so important to get right now? So we're early in the season. I recommend that you have everything ready to go for your show network as soon as you can. Already have it planned out. Already have it programmed if you can. Make your diagrams, which we'll get into that here in a second, and really, really focus on getting that set up so that when it comes down to showtime, you're not scrambling on Zoom, because it happens every year. And to those that are in the Zoom rooms, I can tell you it's always networking issues. Try to test and do that now if you have the ability. Some people don't have the ability, it's backed up, it's in the attic, that's fine. But give yourself time, especially when you start growing your show, to make sure you figure it out, right? So the next big question you get every year, or we get every year, is do I make a show network or do I keep it on my same network? There's a lot of mixed people in this industry that says absolutely you must make a dedicated show network. There's a lot of people that say, nah, with devices today, you really don't need to, or your show's only 3,000 pixels, you should be fine, or you only got one controller. So really, it's really a dive on what you want to do as far as the show network. And a show network is basically where it operates just a show. It has no way to hit your wife or your husband or your kids' Netflix show, or they're streaming all this stuff or playing games or anything like that. That when your show's running, that they can interfere with it. Can we mix the two? Well, remember earlier I said that yes, you can actually mix your show network and your home network together, and still operate fine, but still be separate. Interesting. I'll show a diagram on that here shortly to kind of explain that. Can my home network see my show network? Well, absolutely. There's multiple ways to set this up. I'll show you some diagrams here to kind of make it more sense. So you can absolutely have your home network see your show network, or you can keep it true to where your home network doesn't see your show network. It really depends on what you want to do. So let's talk about a dedicated show network. So let me find my diagrams here. Oh, and evidently my license key expired again. Awesome. Okay. This is an example of two things here. So this is an example of a completely separate network. So the only way that it communicates back and forth, this could be an SD card, this could be a Dropbox, this computer's on Wi-Fi, this computer's on Wi-Fi, and the only thing they share is your show folder. This also can be, if you took a router and moved this over to here and had two routers in between each other, which I forgot I had these connected, sorry, and had these two routers connected together, this is where the double NATing comes into play. I don't recommend doing it. You can do it for years, be just fine. All of a sudden, your second router stops working even after a reboot, if you create a habit. Some people do it for years. I've seen people, it takes them out in a week as far as double NATing. So that's as far as, separating, here's your separate network, and then you also can have these together. The other kind of the more popular is dedicated over Wi-Fi. So this is where you use your Pi. So this is FPP right here. And you basically use the wireless connect to your home network, and then your LAN connects to your show network. And what you can do is set up your Wi-Fi to know where, and if you look at this example, so this is my home network, 192.168.1.0, and I connect to this FPP, which may be, let's call it 1.2, so 192.168.1.2, I'm going to tell all of my devices that 10.10.10.0 network, which is my show network, all needs to go to 192.168.1.2. There's two places you can do this. One is in your router, which is what I highly recommend. I'll show you what that looks like here in a minute. Or 2, you can actually do it on just a computer, which then you're doing command line. And if you look through all the FPP documents, it's all in there. You could do on a Mac and stuff like that. I don't recommend doing it that way unless that's your only option. The reason being is if the route gets taken out or gets deleted and you're in the middle of the show season, it's 5:30, and all of a sudden you got to make a change and you're scrambling and you can't figure it out, and you're on Zoom and there's 200 people in there with all different issues and you're number 188 on the list. So try to stay away from that piece of it. Try to do it on your router. As a matter of fact, let me just log into my router. Give me a second here. Thought I had that pulled up, but evidently not. All right, so this device I have is a Ubiquiti device. So I actually run Ubiquiti in my house. So this is a new Dream Machine, as they call it. This Dream Machine, I can do VoIP on. I can do my door access, which I have not done yet. I have used it in other places. This also does my cameras, which actually has a hard drive in it, and this also does my network. In this device, I can tell you, I have a full gig at my house, and I had a Cisco brand router that would only give me about 550 megs of throughput. When I put this bad boy on there, it's full. I get like 920 by 920, so it's pretty amazing what this can do. All right, so if you've never seen the interface, this is all the pretty cool things going on. You know, I got 85 devices on. You know, I have cameras. You know, what the most used things are. It's pretty cool. So settings. So I have a VoIP network. I have a LAN network. You can create multiple different networks in here. You can really get crazy with it. And system settings. They change where they put stuff all the time. That's the only downside to this. Sometimes they change where they put things. So, all right. So static route. So if I wanted to do a static route, if I wanted to give it a name, we'll call it show network. And so it wants to know the network subnet address. The distance doesn't really matter, and the next hop and what the next hop IP address is. So for that 10.10 address, I would do 10.10.10.0. 0 means everything on that subnet. So because it's a class C, I keep it on the 4th octet. Again, I'm going to go in the deep end, so I'll stop right there. If you had a class B, which is basically more IP addresses, be 0.0, but most people, it is just that. And then remember, sorry, /24. And that's just, /24 means class C. And that's just the way Ubiquiti wants it. Most of the time, you would type /255.255.255.0. Anyway, so remember that IP address. If I assign my IP address at 1.2, so if I were to hit apply, basically, if I'm going to look for 10.10.10.5, which is my Falcon controller, it's automatically going to send it to the Wi-Fi adapter here. So I'm not going to apply that. All right. So I'm not going to apply that, but basically it'd route everything to here and to here. And on your Falcon, you'd set up the routing between networks and hit the checkbox at the bottom and set up the IP addresses, and there you go. You now have a separate network that is separate from your home network, but all computers are able to communicate to it. Why is that useful? Well, you go outside, you need your phone to connect to it. It knows how to connect to it. Um, the bad news here, for the most part, is that if you have multiple FPPs down here and multiple matrices, and if you haven't caught on the X-Lights and you're new, um, the amount of updates that happen throughout the year is astronomical. So it really isn't the best way to do things. Not really, because most of the time it updates all the time. So I would, if you want to stay up to date, then obviously you don't want to do it this way. So the other way is obviously doing the router behind a router. That way everything has internet. Most people do it that way. Is it a networking? Yes. The last thing that I want to talk about, and I know there's an advanced class later this, I think it's tomorrow. That's probably going to get into VLAN, so I'm not going to get into that. Is a split network. So there's two ways you can do a split network. And this is more advanced, and I'm sorry I'm going to lose some people here. So just, if I've lost you, just stop here and don't listen to this next part. Because switches are layer 2, they learn by MAC addresses, right? So they don't care per se where an IP address is. It just knows by MAC address of where it's at. So it routes via MAC address. So you can literally run two networks on one network. In other words, just one router. And as you can see here, these are still two separate networks. But because we're physically separating it through one switch, it has learned all the MAC addresses down here. This switch has learned all the MAC addresses. This is port 10. It knows all the MAC addresses of all this stuff over here. So when my computer needs to go out here, which knows the MAC address because it's asked for it before, all of the data is going to go up here, turn, and stay down here on that side. The other thing is, that's if you run two separate networks. You could, and again, if you're a network engineer, I am not recommending this, but it will work. You could have it all on one network, right? And then everything's got everything's on the same subnet, everything communicates together. But what you're doing here is physically separating the network. So my computer knows to get to these, it's going to go out port 1 that comes over here. My computer knows that it's going to go out port 10 to come over here. And almost 99.999% of the traffic is going to stay on this side of the network. This is actually how I run my show. I run 23,000 pixels on top of 17 cameras, on top of, everybody's got iPads and iPhones and all that kind of stuff, all on one network. This is all done off of one network. Everything runs the same. The only thing I do keep separate is my phones, and that's just because of VoIP. And even then, VoIP is so low traffic, it doesn't really matter. So you can keep it separate and still be on the same network and be just fine if you physically separate it. The moment that you connect your router over to here, then it's no longer, because then what happens is, if you lose this, then what happens is all the traffic's going to have to come in here and hit your router and then come over here. That's what you don't want. So you do not want traffic going through your router or your network where Netflix and stuff is. So if you're like me, you're in a garage, you drop an Ethernet port down to a show switch, and the show switch runs everything below it. So that's how I'm able to run my show on one network and not worry about it. Should I separate it? Yeah, I probably should, but I do networking all day long and it works. So, and I've never had any glitches or anything like that. So, the last thing that we're going to talk about is diagrams. Yeah, I got you. That's why I'm trying to roll here. So, diagrams is absolutely essential in this hobby. Okay. Not only, I can't preach it enough, make up your diagrams for your show. It's going to make so much sense. So I know where a controller is, how it's connecting via power wise, how many pixels everything is, yada, yada, yada. Make sure you make diagrams. I can't tell you how much this helps you when you're troubleshooting. Um, I didn't finish all of it, but for the most part, I got the main stuff. The other thing, as far as diagrams, is you want to document your networking, which I do not have mine for some reason uh, open, and I'm not going to go dig for it. But diagram all of your IP addresses. You also have it, for the most part, diagrammed in Xlights. Here's all your IP addresses. Here's all universes, yada, yada, yada. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop because I'm sure we got a bunch of questions. I see chat now. And somebody's talking about managed switch. Yeah, so managed switches, yeah. So the ubiquitous are all managed switches. And that basically means you can control it on a VLAN basis, or you just have the ability to change things, or it's a little bit smarter than a dumb switch. So anyway, I'm going to stop. Did I miss any questions that Scott didn't answer in chat? Because I know he's pretty versed in networking too.
Well, at this time, we'd like to thank our main sponsor, Boscoyo Studios, for this presentation. Wally Lights for the room for us. Two great companies to deal with. And we want to thank Tom for presenting this Network Basics 101. And wonderful job, Tom. We really appreciate it. The Vizio helped a lot. We're going to take some questions here, which I see them popping up now. So let's get to them.
All right. Will this recording be available? Yes, the recording will be available. I can't tell you when, but this was streamed, so it should still be on YouTube pretty much immediately. Where did I get the widgets from in PowerPoint? Funny thing is, I just took the picture. You can go into Photoshop or something like that. You reverse the colors, remove the background, and it's done. And pretty much did it automatically. I can send you some if you need them. Dream Machine is more than a managed switch. It also runs US operating. Yeah, the Dream Machine is for sure definitely more than a switch. It's actually a router too, firewall. Um, and it's pretty robust. I'm getting a full gig, even with the firewall on, so it's pretty awesome. Why not put a router behind another router? So that's double natting. Um, basically, a router is looking to have a public IP address, and I don't know if you've ever seen it or anybody's ever seen it, but if some ISPs, you're even getting a private IP address from them. So by the time your Xbox or PlayStation, for instance, and you're trying to stream or anything like that, a lot of times it does not like that. There's actually PlayStation, if you're behind, I think, 3 routers as far as private IP addresses, it won't even let it work. The other thing is that there's an anomaly where basically the router forgets how to route anywhere, inside and out. And usually a reboot will fix it. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you got to reboot both routers. But double natting is a big no-no in the IT world or networking world. And you definitely want to do it. Somebody said 2 Ethernet adapters. Yes. So there's a couple people that run 2 Ethernet adapters. on the computer. One's show side, one's a networking side. Works perfectly fine. No router involved. Boom, done. If you split setup with the AP be put on the show side of the switch. If you were to split it and make it its own network, yes, you put one on the switch side or on your show side and one on your house side. Unify access points, my show network runs through all my Wi-Fi on both sides. So that's the advantage of running everything on one network. Do both Culp and Falcons have the 100 meg cap? As of right now, the Falcon is 100 meg. The Culp is, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I think the new ones are gig. Some of the bigger ones are gig, some are 100 megs. But I think V4 that's coming out, they're going to be gig. Okay, man. I'm muted. I'm not saying anything.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now okay.
Okay. Tom, my TP-Link router that I bought about 6 months ago, it actually had me link it to my ISP provider router. Should I pull that router off then, the ISP provider, and just use that TP-Link router? But that was the way it was instructed to set up, so I'm just curious.
It depends. I mean, you also have to work with your ISP too. So I do not use my ISP router, but I had to call them and tell them to allow my MAC address. So you can go behind their modem per se and put it into bridge mode, in other words, so that everything passes down to your router. If that makes sense. You can do it either or. No, I think he got muted. Self-terminated versus manufacturer. So it's really just a convenience thing. I self-terminate all my cables going out to my receivers and stuff, just because I can cut them to length and I don't have to have 300 feet sitting on one. I mean, not 300 feet, but 75 feet or 50 feet sitting somewhere in a circle. All right, I think that's all the time we have for questions. I know the next presenter's got to be there. So thanks again, and enjoy VCS, guys.